Doing today? You know what time it is.
I probably sound like a little robot there.
Whoops, sorry about that. Let's try this again. You know what time it is. Might be nice if I was on the right screen. It is the best hour of your week. It is Tipping Points and Puzzle Pieces, episode number 72 in a row. Man, okay, 52 weeks in a year. This is a weekly show. So we are not only a year in, but we're almost a year and a half in because 26 plus 52. Now that's consistent. Okay. And if you want to be resilient, you got to be consistent. Let me bring on Mr. Consistency because I have missed some shows, but he has not. With no further ado, let me bring to you Mark Boat Ride Ross.
Hey, all.
How you doing there, Mr. Consistent?
I am doing really well. And as I said in the comments, today's the day you probably want to buckle your seatbelts and hold on tight. Keep your arms and head and other parts inside the vehicle, and let's get ready to roll down the road.
All right, click, click. I'm ready.
Okay, and as the wheels start clicking up that hill like a roller coaster going on, let's jump in. We're talking about getting out of your head and getting things done. We all have this reflection inside of our head of ourselves and how we relate to the world. And we have these ideas about things we want to get done. We all have them. Obviously, mine is Resilient Ecosystems and the Gets Up Resiliency Project. But to get them out of your head and to get you out of your head and to get to the point of getting them done, there's a whole bunch of things that have to happen. And one of them is analysis, looking at something and seeing where your idea fits into it, and then the steps you need to take to get it adopted. Because nobody does anything by themselves, correct?
Correct.
Everybody does things with other people. Even if you don't think of it that way, you get to the point where you're there, and that's what has to happen. So I'm in the process of writing a document for the organization, and um, as I mentioned to you earlier, I've decided that I'm going to do each section title as a song that has influenced my life in one way or another and is very appropriate for the section below. The section we're going to talk about for the next few minutes is A Day in the Life by the Beatles. And the reason it's titled that is because on Monday, as I was writing this document, I'll talk a little bit more about what the document is in a few moments. I just pulled up the news and I read the Guardian newspaper, and a little later on, we'll talk about why the Guardian over a lot of the other newspapers that we could be reading and news sources. And in one day in the Guardian, these were the stories. So I'm going to do a little reading here. U.S. swelters as Southwest braces for a record-breaking heat wave of 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The National Weather Service urged people to take precautions against life-threatening heat conditions. Over the weekend, the National Weather Service issued a warning about forthcoming further excessive heat in an already scorching month, even by tropical U.S. desert standards. Okay, so that's one. Broken sidewalks, crumbling homes, people evacuated in Los Angeles cliffside shifts as homes in Los Angeles were falling down into the canyon below them.
Wow.
Not from rain, but just because they're collapsing because they were improperly built on shifting ground. Remember Oso?
Mm-hmm.
They knew that was landslide territory. They built homes on it. They sold it to people anyhow.
Oh, they knew.
Oh, God, yes.
Wow.
It was very well documented, very well known. Okay, third article. U.S. faces a dangerous weather with flooding and heat waves alerts through all of the Northeast. And I don't know if you've seen the pictures of Vermont with the flooding going on in Vermont through the cities.
I have.
And New York and the Hudson River Valley is all flooding, which means Yonkers and some of the other cities in New York. So Hello Dolly's famous city Yonkers is having some serious issues right now. I want to remind you guys, this is one day's news. Italy, heat wave could push temperatures close to European record. High pressure forecast is 48 degrees centigrade, which is 108, 109 degrees. Heat wave last summer in Italy killed 61,000 people between May and September.
The heat wave?
Yeah.
Wait, what's the population there?
In Europe, millions.
I mean, but that seems like a lot. I mean, 61,000?
Yeah,
Seems like a really high number.
Yeah, because it was so hot in the equatorial regions of Europe. But
Wow.
this is Syrian heat killed more than 60,000 people in Europe last summer. Scientists have found a disaster more deadly than greenhouse gases uh, baking the planet. EU statisticians rang alarm bells in August as sweltering heat, withering drought, and raging fires consumed much of the continent. Yet it was not really recorded in our papers. We'll talk about that shortly. Okay, and then the other one from this weekend is Ed Sheeran held a concert in Pittsburgh. Do you know who Ed Sheeran is? Sort of.
Allegedly, yes. I saw him in
Okay.
the Kids App Sun. You can win tickets.
Okay, so he did a concert in Pittsburgh, 17 hospitalizations from heat related issues. Now, this is going to be a little different. They got 37 calls for service, 17 transports to the hospital, 2 were heart failures. And the temperature in the outdoor arena was 72 degrees, but it was 92% humidity. So it's not just 120 degrees. 120 degrees in humidity changes the ball game completely.
Wait. You said 72 degrees.
Yeah, 72 degrees in heat, which isn't that much, and we have that today. But the 92% humidity is a factor that changes that.
Why? Why? Explain that.
Because it's so hot and heavy that the air, breathing the air is, and I'm not a
So it's
doctor.
like thick. It's just
Yeah.
like, gotcha.
Right.
Okay.
So it adds an extra strain.
So just a mild day. Like I love 72 degrees.
Right. And then
Wow.
the final one I just put in here because it was interesting. An Iowa meteorologist left his job because of the harassment he was getting from a very few folks when he started actually reporting climate change at his station and the effects of climate change.
Mm.
In Florida, it's still against the law to, thanks to the state legislature, to actually talk about climate change in any way, shape, or form.
Really?
Yes. And if you've watched the Years of Living Dangerously series on Showtime, it was really interesting because of the work that we did with the Clean Technology Trade Alliance in Chihuahua, Mexico, right across the border in Texas, where the major drought was killing the beef industry, which also was underreported in the papers. There were people walking around the meatpacking plant praying to God with their Bibles, circling and praying for rain. While south of the border in Mexico, they had no trouble talking about climate change whatsoever because they've been suffering 20 years of drought and desertification, which killed 80% of their agriculture and caused out migrations to Juarez and huge social crises.
80%.
80%.
Did the Guardian talk a little bit about the wildfires in Canada and the air quality in America?
Yeah, but not on that day. It was
Gotcha.
the next day. It was the next day.
Well, and that's consistent, right?
Yeah. So the Guardian. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the reason I choose the Guardian. And in this report I'm writing, and I'll talk about it now. So English language and our accepted practices are extraordinarily limiting. In corporate America, it is accepted that you're going to do a no more than 50-word mission statement, and 50 words is outrageously long. It has to be like, a mission statement. But can you really talk about a mission statement if you're restricted to 10 to 20 words?
Mm-hmm.
A mission statement is what you do. It needs to be full, it needs to be robust. So it's a ridiculous rule made for people who don't read. And that people aren't going to pay any attention to it anyhow because there's nothing there to pay attention to. You're using a buzzword. It's essentially, my mission statement is a meme. Okay, great. And a vision statement, if you're going to do something meaningful, you have to write more than that. So I started writing this document, and I'm like going, what do I call this document? I mean, it's not a report. It's not, it's not it's not a marketing statement. It's not a white paper. It's about what Resilient Ecosystems does and why they do it and how they're doing it and what they are doing to get to the point. So getting out of my head, our head, everyone's head, looking at what needs to happen and writing how we're going to do it step by step, which comes back to this the theme of today is you have to plan. You have to look at the environment around it. You have to determine what the steps are going to need to be taken. You're going to have to figure out what the roadblocks are, and you're going to need to figure out how to bring people on board to create a successful implementation of the projects. And so that's what I've been doing for 10 years. And now I'm finally writing it down. So what I finally called this document is more than a mission statement, less than a manifesto.
Less than a manifest. How long is this going to be?
Probably
Less than a manifesto.
probably 20, 25 pages by the time it's done. And it depends on how in depth I get on each of the projects.
Okay.
But
I'm with you.
and we're going to talk about one of the projects toward the end of this. But going back to the news, in this document, I gave links and some description to who owns the newspapers. And we won't actually. I'm gonna go ahead and send the link to you,
Okay.
and you can bring up the Harvard, I believe, University review of it. And can I send you the link in the private chat?
In the chat? Yep, that's perfect.
Okay.
And while Mark is doing that, gather together, grow together's mission statement. Gather together, grow together uses creative solutions to help low-income Kitsap County residents maximize the benefits of services they receive.
Okay, you should have it.
Yep, pulling it up now. Okay. Boom. And kapow.
Okay, so if you scan down a little bit on that,
Mhm. Make it a little bit bigger there. How's that? A little better?
didn't really, yeah, there you go. There it changed. So if you cruise down just a little bit, these are the top newspapers or top news sources for people. So Wikipedia is owned by Google. I don't people. I mean, it's wholly owned by Google, but it's an open
Wiki
source.
is the largest?
That's where most
Wow.
people. That's where most people go to find their information.
I rarely get information from Wikipedia.
But that's you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Fox News, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch and his conglomeration, and you'll be surprised that 6 or 7 of the other news sources are owned by Murdoch, though not as clearly or visible.
Wow. I Fox would have surprised me.
CNN is owned by Warner and several investment firms.
This is terrifying.
So we can keep going all the way through, but essentially what you're going to find is PBS, NPR, and The Guardian are the most reliable sources. New York Times used to be, but they borrowed $250 million to stay afloat, and suddenly their news started getting watered down.
Mm.
Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. And as you start seeing this, you'll start seeing that investment companies own most of the newspapers. So you might understand that this section in the document is called "Land of Confusion."
Mm. Wow.
So people wonder why they can't trust the news and why the news has biases. Well, there's your answer. As Marwan is sitting there in shock. Be careful of who. No, by the way, Gannett owns the Kitsap Sun.
Oh, USA Today.
Yeah, they own the Kitsap Sun. And they're owned by holding companies and investment firms.
Wow. This is fascinating. Bloomberg, Advanced Publications. Some of these I haven't heard of. I haven't heard of Advanced Publications.
Yeah, I had neither, but they're
The
fairly
New Yorker,
but they're
Vogue,
fairly large.
GQ. Yes, I know all that.
Hmm.
Oh, they own Reddit,
Hmm.
Vox. Okay.
Now, Vox, everybody
Wow.
thinks is a left wing paper, but if you start looking at who owns them, Equity Partners, Comcast.
So, do you think that some of these media investors kind of play people against each other? Like they've got multiple publications, and this one is right leaning, this one's left leaning, but
I think that
they're
they're pushing for their investments in other things to get ahead. So they kind of water down, if not at the very least, they're watering down news about corporate misconduct, malfeasance, and misconduct.
I like CNET
Yeah.
for techies. Tend to like CNET. Wow. Oh man. Oh, I didn't see how small the scroll screen is. Sorry. I'll digress and just go back up to the top. I think it's alarming that Wiki is number one, especially since anyone can go in and change it. Um, that's a little scary. But then Fox and CNN and MSC, NBC being in the top 10 are also very scary, right? I would expect to see ABC, NBC, and CBS, but then even those are
And
subsidiaries of.
ABC is owned by Disney.
Wow. Well, what's the solution to that?
Well, do you ever see the movie Working Girl with Melanie
No.
Griffith, Harrison Ford, Sigourney Weaver?
Man, how old do you think I am, Mark?
About 5 or 6 years younger than I am.
I can't even drink my water now.
So back in the day when this was made, and I don't remember when Working Girl was made, but it was late '80s, early '90s. Um, and back then, there could be no foreign ownership of media. The whole premise of it was buy a media company to keep from being hostile, having a hostile takeover from foreign entities. And nowadays, the FCC seems to have thrown all those rules out the window, and anybody can own anything. And the conglomeration and binding of things is pretty frightening, down to fewer and fewer owners in all cases. The point that I was making in here is, where do you go when all of the information you get is biased and is manipulating you and built to distract you and built to get clicks, built to market to you? Where do you go to get real information? It's hard. So you have to choose places. So when people look at me and say, well, why are you doing The Guardian? It says, because it's more reliable than any U.S. paper I know. Oh, good. Thank you, Justin. That's very good to know. You want to pop that up there?
Yeah, Wiki is open source and have dedicated curators. I don't trust the ownership of the media like cable or even local news who are owned by Sinclair Broadcasting.
Okay, so part of the reason that I'm building this document the way that I am, and to answer your question earlier, is I'm rewriting the mission so you'll know when I know.
Okay.
I'm in the process of getting there, and it's a challenge because we're what we started out to do and what our original mission was, which was a meme, is so far different than where we started. And the need
Hmm.
is so much greater that it seemed to me that we need to be more robust about how we talk about our vision and when we talk about our mission. And our vision is to create resilient communities and bring people together beyond their biases in religion and politics and social status and skin color and whatever the hell else the various things are, to a place of humanity and embrace our mutual humanity. That's the vision. The mission is how we get there. And so that's what we're working on now, is how to describe the mission more accurately. But here's one of the things that has changed, and our earlier conversation about housing. one of the things that has changed so dramatically in our vision. As you know, being the president of our board, that I've been putting off the shelter for all because I really saw no inroad to it. There's
Right.
so much money, so much politics, so many variables in it. But then the climate crisis suddenly brought forward, and you saw one day's reporting on climate crisis, and this is just the beginning. The opening statement, or the opening title in the document, is 2023, the year everything changed.
Mm.
We have hit so many landmarks that were supposed to be in the future for climate change this year that it's unbelievable. Well, it's all too believable. But let's talk about heat for a moment. It's going to get hotter. We broke records in July 5th, 4th, and 5th. We're going to be breaking more records later this year. Next year, we'll break more records. People in Washington State don't have air conditioners. And if everybody did have air conditioners and they turned the air conditioner on, the power grid would go down. Let's just understand it. We don't have an infrastructure to support us living through a climate change scenario. We don't. So we have to rethink what we allow to be built. We must rethink the existing homes that we live in, because no one has the money in our failing economy to rebuild their house to be thermal mass and to be efficient. So we have to tackle this in a very different way. Nor the migration that will happen. Absolutely, that is happening. Not will happen, is happening. And Justin is talking about climate migration, which is happening all over the world right now, and is going to get worse as the oceans rise and places get underwater. Again, the U.S. papers don't cover it, but the islands, South Pacific islands, are applying for citizenship to Australia, and Australia is taking thousands and thousands of people in, hundreds of thousands of people in from the South Pacific Islands that in another decade won't be there.
Wow.
This is reality. This is not imagination. This is what we're not being told because it's not in the corporation's best interest to tell us. Now, in their end game, we can talk about that over a beer sometime. We only have an hour here to go into it, but they aren't going to survive any better than anybody else. But they're running in a machine. They don't think about the results. The machine doesn't allow for that. They just keep doing the things over and over again and becoming successful and garnering resources while the rest of us are trying to figure it out. The thing is, the rest of us aren't going to survive very well in the next decade if we don't start changing the way we do things. We have to find energy efficient means now. So you're hearing a different rhetoric from me, a different talking point from me than you ever have before, because it suddenly occurred to me that, we could talk about Cascadia Rising, we could talk about any number of other things, but how well will you survive in your house if we have 3 weeks of 100+ degree days?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Will somebody come find your body? Because that's happening all over the world.
Well, you told me to buckle up.
Here we are. So there are solutions to all of this. All of these things are solutions, have solutions to them. We can grow our own food in grow centers that can mitigate heat and continue to grow, because food is going to be one of the first things to go. Water evaporation. We need to start recycling water. We need to do it now. We don't need to be told that we have to put another $60 million into a wastewater treatment plant here that isn't going to give us anything back except maybe a 20% bump in productivity. We don't know what the water levels are here. And and politicians are talking about bringing in another 500,000 people. That's not just wishful thinking, that's insanity. We don't know what we don't know. Okay, we can look at India for those parts of the world that experience those 100+ days. Yeah. And they're talk to the people in the Southwest right now who are going through 120 degrees weather. And you could say they're used to it, but they're not used to 120 degrees, and 5 degrees can make a hell of a lot of difference in quality of life. We're here now. This is happening. It's not going to get better. We can no longer put the brakes on and think that it's going to get better. Nor, I mean, a show of hands here. How many people believe our politicians or corporations are going to do anything for us? No, I don't think we do. They are.
So how do we cut through this junk right here?
By talking to each other and bringing real data to the table. That's noise. And the trouble is that noise gets in our heads and keeps us from taking what's in our head and making it reality. We get there by talking to each other, by creating community, by embracing our humanity. And I know that sounds trite. And I know that I can't take this picture in my head and put it into your head. And it frustrates me every day, which is part of why I'm writing this document. But we can get to a place where we can talk to each other, even if we didn't vote for the same people, even if we don't go to the same church, even if we look different from each other. We can, because we can embrace our humanity. And we have to get by our fear of doing that.
So, Obama and his daughter were having this conversation recently. He was on a podcast, and he was sharing a story of his daughter and her friends talking about the 2 degrees that we don't want to cross over, and the fact that we're, on a racetrack headed there. And I think he was saying something about the fact that we might get to 2.5 degrees above, and we still have to try, to do the things, even if we think it's too late at this point.
Too late? What is too late? We're still alive. We still have a chance to do something. If we come together and start moving, we can do a lot of stuff. And while we're going to hit some of those points, we might not hit other ones.
Well, and that's what's so dangerous about, using words like it's too late. It's like, well, there's nothing we can do about it anyway, so why change anything? And it's like, no, I mean, that's already the point of no return, but it gets worse from there.
Yeah, and it gets worse for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's not some mythical person out there. It gets worse for you, for us, for everybody.
Justin says they won't. There is no profit until we build the infrastructure. Then the corporations clamor for the same infrastructure they did not want to pay for and allow them to profit off of us.
Exactly so. So let's talk about, you've heard me talk about this before, so I'm just going to touch on some of these points. Germany has been doubling down on renewable energy. They're running a large, like the majority of their country on it now. They've developed some amazing software switching for power. And you go to our local utility and they'll say, oh, it's not mature enough. One of the reasons they say it's not mature enough is because they're thinking massive scale production. And while that's part of the equation, they need to stop the massive scale production and start thinking about local production, microgrids, and local storage. Until they start thinking about that, we're not going to have any power security. And that's just the truth. We need to start knowing what our water tables are doing. We need to do what Minnesota did. Basically going, we're taking all of this back from all of you the special taxation districts, and we're going to learn what our water tables are doing and figure out what we need to do. And then we need to start pushing for recycled water. We need to recycle water, not just dump it into a holding bin. We've got to stop the stormwater nonsense, because the stormwater nonsense is putting feces. We have heavy rain situations and flooding and seawater rise. Feces is going to be in everything. Already is. It dumps into the sound frequently from several of the wastewater treatment plants around here. Because stormwater, the way that they've decided to build them for efficiency, or because it's always been done that way, is to build the stormwater runoff right next to the wastewater treatment plants.
Wow.
And we get a big storm, and the waste goes right into the sound. This is the reality we live with. People are getting away with literal murder because we don't ask the next question. Nobody does. Um, Renewable energy makes energy prices drop to the negatives. Capitalists are terrified for renewable energy. Yeah, well, the only way we're going to get there is to come together and create grassroots networks that have continuity, not a one-trick pony that goes out and protests for, whatever the moment protest is, but people who build grassroots network dedicated to changing to support our humanity. That's where we're heading. That's what we're doing. That is our mission. The vision is to create the networks to make the changes we need. And you want to see markets work? Take the power of the market away from the corporations and put it back into people's hands. Yeah, we're not going to buy that because it doesn't support our humanity. And you'll start seeing them invest in all kinds of cool stuff. This is where we need to go. And we have several projects on the books to do that. We have the Power for All, which Matthew is running. We have Food for All, which Crystal's stepping into the role of leading that project. The Shelter for All, I'm probably going to look for somebody that can step into that role too. If not, I'll take it on because I think we need to have this conversation about the ability to create thermal mass buildings that protect us from the heat and minimize our energy signatures. We need to start talking about powering the buildings via solar and wind and micro hydro. We need to secure our food. We need to secure our water. We need to secure our ability to live. And while we're building this whole new infrastructure of homes that needs to happen if people are to survive, then we can start building infrastructure for the homeless people to be integrated back into homes. And make it all part of one infrastructure project.
Today, not tomorrow.
Not tomorrow. Unless we want to start doing body count math. And I've never been fond of that.
And we have been.
Yeah, it's exactly so. Also, just go back and touch on COVID for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
The melting of the permafrost and the changing of temperatures is going to create a lot more of those types of issues than we currently have. That's one of the risks that are coming out of this. Water is life. So, Marwan, how many days can you live without water?
3.
Yes. How many days can you live without food?
30.
Yeah, 3 weeks, roughly. So, do you need food? Or do you need water to create food?
I do.
So, if you don't have water, you're pretty much done, right?
That's a very true story.
So, would you say that's the number one priority?
Yeah, that's pretty super critical.
So, why do we take it so lightly?
Well, you just showed a chart on where we're getting our information from.
Yep.
And the fact that, these news sources, and I can't remember who made this judgment, whether it was the Supreme Court or where this went to, but I remember there was a conversation, with Fox News and their opinion news shows, and they ended up winning. And the judgment was that people were smart enough to discern that it was opinion and not news, but it's so deceptively veiled in news that folks can't decipher that is opinion, right?
Yeah, Justin, I think that's a harder question, and I'm going to be at Cups Cafe at 10:30 on Saturday morning. If you swing by, that's on 4th and Pacific, and we can have a conversation about it. Right now, all I can say is there's got to be transitional strategies in place. At some point, maybe nationalization of everything makes sense, but not the way our government runs right now. There's a lot of work that we have to do on the ground before that can happen. I would just be happy with being able to use a. You live next door to Cups Cafe. Anyway, um, what we need to do is hold our for local water supplies. We need to hold our cities and our county accountable for it, and so we have to do political math here. If we have a grassroots network of 1,000 people, we can pretty much pressure anybody in this county into doing anything, um, because well, anything sane and rational, because that is they look at 1,000 people and they think there's 100,000 people talking, because for every one person there's 10 people and so on and so forth so forth. Um, we need to do steps to create the narrative that we can get to the bigger picture of nationalizing. I think that we need to head to a Star Trek economy, but that's me. And the point to get there, and put it all under one auspice, impassionate auspices with very little human manipulation, is a long path, and it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of people at the table. Our whole gig is that we see this as a jigsaw puzzle, and while we have a lot of the pieces identified, until people show up with their pieces of the puzzle, we don't know what other questions to ask or what things we missed or any of the other things. So it's all of us together that are going to create the grassroots network to move forward. Not one person saying, charged, let's go there, get them. We have to actually do some planning and some thinking and some assessment, a lot of communication, a lot of discussion, so we can create something that's going to last and has continuity and capacity to make the change. So, do I want national? Do I support it? Yeah. Do I think we're there? Not anywhere close. But if we can get it done here, we can create a model for elsewhere. Does that make sense?
How do we get to your Star Trek economy without the imminent threat of global annihilation? I mean, that's how it was in Star Trek, and
We have it.
we're not being.
It's sitting right in front of us. That's what we've been talking about this entire time.
I know, but the people don't see it, right? They're not seeing it yet.
So we talk to each other one on one and build communities and build the network. And well, my oh, okay, yeah, I'm interested in moving that direction. We just have to create the grassroots networks to make it happen, and that's what I do. That's pretty much where we're going. We have some things to point at, some things that we can all get behind and do. Um, yeah. Boy, I'm just going to put it out there because Marwan, cover your ears. Maybe yeah, maybe social democracy would be better if the people at the tables that are talking about it didn't look quite so dour. Engage people, bring them in, have a conversation about it. Be ready to focus not on the problems but on the solutions. Sorry, that's my phone. Um, and talk about how we can get to a better place together. And that's the problem about any of the change movements is you get a lot of really intense people, and not that they're wrong and there's no reason to be intense, but you don't get people engaged by preaching at them. You get them engaged by hooking them into the conversation and giving them hope. And especially when there is hope, you don't want to sell it if there isn't. And that's kind of the whole point of the way we look at it is the whole grassroots network. But also understand you don't need everybody. Margaret Mead's famous quote, I think I say this every week. You'll have to check me on that, Marwan. Um, Never doubt that a small group of dedicated people can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. That's been proven by science now. If we get 20% of the people moving in this direction, everybody else will follow along.
To Justin's point, capitalist elite class from both sides only want one thing: more money. I was having this conversation earlier with Joe in regards to our homeless crisis on ML King, and one of the things that we have to understand is There are different stakeholders that are in the at the table for different reasons. And I think it's incumbent upon us to find out the language in which to speak to them that's going to prick their ears, right? Because they're not going to do it the other way. So we're going to have to do the heavy lifting to find out how we can extend. Hey, you know what? If the only thing that's going to motivate you is money, and you're going to you're going to die, and we'll have to pry those cold dead presidents out of your hand, then how can we frame that?
I have a visual with that. Sorry.
How can we frame that where it is a win for them?
Well, again, I don't know, but if we get enough people at the table, we'll figure it out.
Right.
And that's part of it. And to speak to that, our
No, I've got it
society,
in my mind now too.
our society is actually not minority rule. It's just that the majority doesn't speak.
Right.
And the whole point about bringing the first three words of the Constitution of the United States, "We the people," that's never changed. It's just not used. They feel they are winning, yeah, because they're getting what they want, and we're not getting what we want because we don't have news that tells us what we need to know. We don't have support systems, and we don't treat each other as humans. We treat each other as something to be afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can point at thousands and thousands and thousands of various different things, but all of that can be changed if we start coming together in community and built on our humanity and focused on humanity. In the Senate, not everything is done in the Senate. Everybody looks at the federal government. Not everything is done in the federal government. Most things, most changes happen locally. And you know where the very far right wing has been focusing all of their issues, all of their attention for the last 50 years? Local politics. So let's get some people together and tell the people in local politics that they won't be in their seat very long if they don't start embracing things that support our humanity and not detract from it. Exactly so. And local judges aren't there for life.
And I would dare say to talk to both sides.
Yeah.
Even if they are vehemently against some of the things that you advocate for.
Everyone
And
I
that's
talk
my
to,
intent.
yeah, no, and everyone I talk to, and I talk to everybody. I can have a conversation with somebody who vehemently disagrees with everything I'm about because I ask questions and I sincerely want to know the answers. Well, then elect judges that make sense. I have never said that the political process doesn't play a role in this. It just plays too big a role now. And it's
Mhm.
being manipulated by people who have been there for a very long time. And it's time to change. And they're very good at getting people who come in all excited and become precinct officers to they are very good about getting them disinterested and going away. And so one of the things the grassroots network can do is get people into the Democratic and process in both the Democrat and Republican. The trouble with saying Democratic process, I immediately think Democrat. But the Democratic process is both Democrat Republicans because of the two parties, the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, all of the various parties.
Big D.
Big D democracy,
Mhm.
democratic process. We need to get people into that process so that we start getting the ability to elect people who actually support what we want to do. And that, to my knowledge, has not been done on a grassroots scale of the size it needs to happen or that can happen here ever. Because people would rather talk about politics than talk to each other.
Well, I think the other thing too, Mark, is it's not just enough. I think there does need to be more emphasis on local politics, but at the same time, it's not just enough to elect that person that shares that viewpoint. You have to support on the other side of it.
Yep.
A lot of folks will vote and they say, "Okay, I got it. Oh, that person won. All right, things are going to change." And you're sending that one. It's cannon fodder, right? You're sending that one person out again into the herd, and there's no support behind them to push those agenda issues and say,
So
hey, this is where the conversation is going to be steered, and this is we're going to keep talking about this until we get some type of
so
resolution. And through that, having that conversation, like I said, talking to
both sides.
other folks that don't necessarily agree and say, hey, like you said, you agree on water, you agree on food, you agree on we do agree on these things. So how can we make that a win for both sides and go forward? We can stay opposite on this issue and that issue and the other issue. Let's focus on the things that are going to keep us alive, and we can go from sustainability to resiliency, right?
Exactly so. And you need both. You need people from all. You need a diverse group of people from everywhere to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, love him or hate him, Obama's first election, he said, "Yes, we can," which is exactly the right thing because he was speaking exactly to what you just said. You can elect me, but if you elect me and leave me hanging, I have no support and I have no mandate and I cannot get the things done. Bernie Sanders has said the same thing over and over and over again. It's us together, not me alone, that's going to make a change. We know this, but we shy away from the fact that we have to build a coalition of people who may not be like us, who may not think like us, because that same group of newspapers spends an awful lot of time telling us that others not like us are evil people. I can't even wrap my head around what that means. I guess I've had a lot of conversations with evil people and found them to be pretty okay. They don't do things the reason I do them, but they do them for they have thought out why they do them and they have reasons for it. I may not agree with it, but I understand it. And that doesn't mean we can't agree on a lot of other things.
Mm-hmm. Dare to have the conversation.
Yeah.
Make yourself available. That's why these spaces, I believe, are important for sure.
And while Marwan and I are talking the same language now, let me just point out that Marwan and I do not agree on on a lot of things. This is something we do agree on, but getting to this point where we both have agreement on it took a lot. Go back and look at some of the other 70 episodes prior to this one, and you'll find us, butting heads sometimes. But basically, embracing our humanity and getting and you're amazed if you can get people to put down their politics to talk about how to keep food on their table.
Well, and part of that is adhering to the social contract that we have with each other, right?
Yep. So
Is we can have
so
those
Justin,
hard conversations.
I'm going to say this just as clearly as I can. Unless you can stop talking about the Democrats and the Republicans and the politics, we can't have the other conversation. That's the point. I mean, you keep coming back with the parties, the capitalists, everything else. Those are just buckets to stuff things in. What we need to talk about is how can we help get food on your table? How do we help bring your neighbors together? How do we help make sure everybody gets fed? How do we help make sure that the 46% of this country who are one paycheck away from being homeless don't get there? And by the way, for the quick mathing, that's about 148 million people. So you all know somebody who's one paycheck away from homeless. It's time to start having the conversation about our humanity, not about who we vote for or who's evil, who's not evil. That distracts us from the actual conversation we need to have. And that's kind of the point of what we're talking about. You have to set that aside for the other conversation. And the other conversation will lead to improving or changing that.
So I definitely don't have the capacity for this, but there definitely seems that there's a huge vacuum on just providing news, just unbiased news. This is what it is. No opinion, no slant. I don't think
Well,
there's any conversation in that because typically when things are made, it's in counter in opposition of what exists currently. But someone just needs to. This is what it is. It's 70 degrees outside. You want to add something to that or take away from it, that's up to you. But this is just the fact. There's no opinion that goes along with that.
Yeah, and we are talking about climate change is real. Science all supports it. That's a fact. We are not going back. It's going to get worse. That's a fact. Unless we can sit down and start having conversations about how to make our lives better together, and it's going to take us together to do this. And we that for that effort, we have to set aside politics because they aren't going to do anything for us. We can talk about how much they're not going to do anything for us, but they aren't going to do anything for us. So let's start with one neighborhood. Well, let's start with two neighborhoods. Let's go to three neighborhoods. Let's go to a dozen neighborhoods. And let's create a larger network from those representation from those neighborhoods, modeling the democracy the way it's supposed to work, and create a grassroots network that can apply pressure to get things changed. Or better yet, more directly, start growing community gardens and learning how to work together and making sure that everybody gets food.
And understand that's a significant thing, right? Just to be a neighborhood ambassador and make those connections. I haven't done a great job on that from the barbecue last year, right? So I've got work to do. I'm more friendly with folks, and everyone waves now, but I do need to take that next step. Now I am growing my kale, and my kale does look fantastic, I must say. Justin says, I was homeless. I am in a program for at risk homeless.
Mhm.
So if I didn't have this room, I'd still be in my car.
Yeah. And that's something we have to address too. I mean, that is one of the first things we have to address is, um, nobody, I'll say this now, Marwan, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm willing to be corrected. Nobody that I know has any real numbers of how many homeless people there are. And the numbers I see are patently ridiculously low.
It's an estimate because it's a point in time count.
Yeah,
So, I mean, literally, you would have to have volunteers that just happen to bump into every single person all at the same time. And it's just not
no,
possible.
it's
So
not.
those numbers are typically, I would say, is as much as three times lower than what's actually reported.
No,
And that may be modest because I heard a stat the other day by another organizer um, that was saying there were 1,200 children that were unhoused in Kitsap County, and I'm like, holy crap, that's a lot. I've never heard that number, um, but they're kind of tied in with the school district, and so they would have
better numbers.
better ideas
So
because many of those
let's
kids are in school.
let's take a quick look at 1,200. You said 1,200 kids.
1,200.
So 1,200 kids would blow that 6,000 some odd number of total homeless right out of the water. So I'm going to propose something to you, which I was
To me,
to you and to the people here. Um,
okay.
it is my opinion, and I'm going to raise my hand so you know that I'm saying, here it is, raise my hand so you know I'm saying this is my opinion, that we have a lot of people in this county who have responsibilities to address issues like homelessness, um, um, rent, the cost of living, that are all shrugging their shoulders and saying we can't do anything about it, and are giving you basically suboptimal solutions or offerings. I think that we should put them all in a room. Now, my personal opinion is I think we should lock the doors and throw away the keys and say you can't leave or go to the bathroom until you come up with a solution. But if you get a whole bunch of people who have the responsibility, the obvious responsibility for something, and they're all in the same room together, it's hard to shrug your shoulders and say I can't do anything because they have the power within them to come up with a solution. And
Hmm.
something's got to come up with this ridiculous number of cost of living and rent in this area.
Well, we have to address the factors, right?
Mhm.
The military driving up the cost of housing here.
Well, the military is only because they will meet the cost of the renters here. So it's a feeding cycle, and as Justin said, um, we have the military that's a guaranteed income. So people are raising the rents, and the military are meeting that, and everybody else suffers.
Well, no. Well, what it is the BAH, the housing allowance is quite significant. It's nice. And so if I have a military tenant and I'm just going to use an arbitrary number and I can get 1,800 because that's what the housing allowance calls for, then you as my neighbor that's going to rent is going to say, well, I was charging 14, but I can get 18. So I'm going to make the rent 18, right? And then boom, 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 right?
Right.
And then of course we're on the peninsula and we're an hour or 30 minutes from Seattle, and it's so expensive there. So now I can come and live over here and I can be to work in 30 minutes. I can't even do that from, Rainier Beach to the Central District or from Federal Way to downtown Seattle. It's a 45-minute commute. It's faster for me to live over here and it's far cheaper. So then we're getting squeezed out. So there are tons of factors that are driving our housing up. Using some of these for me, using these developers that we have come from out of state, and that we give them all these incentives and tax credits to build, and we'll pay the fines in order to do the things that they want to do instead of building from within. We have everything that we need right here in Kitsap County to build
And going back,
truly
and we're,
affordable housing.
and we're building shit housing that isn't going to help us as it gets hotter and hotter and hotter. Go buy an air conditioner and then watch the power grid go down because the power grid hasn't been upgraded since the 60s. But more importantly, we have the power here to say, yeah, enough is enough. We know the military will pay X and that people can get X, but everybody else needs to work on trying to create things that are livable. So maybe we need to talk about rent control or some variant of that.
Mhm. What's interesting, I'm part of a transportation equity group also. And, the big thing is electrification of the vehicles, and Washington is following California's model.
And do we
And
have a
one of
grid that
the
will support
things
that?
one of the things that we don't hear here in Kitsap is brownouts, right? California hears about brownouts, and that's exactly what you're talking about. As we experience these hotter and hotter temperatures, and more people are running air conditioners, and our grids fail, and couple that with the same time, our government saying, "Hey, let's push electrification for our vehicles." So now you're going to electrify your vehicle. You got to charge that. You got to run your AC. You've got and all of our infrastructure is so antiquated, and we're not. Yeah, we're running into a buzzsaw, and
Face
eyes
first.
wide open.
Well, as I said, rent. Well, yeah, and we can talk about that. And I say it's not going to be me who figures that one out because that's one of the areas I'm not smart enough on. But having you at the table, having other people at the table, and sitting and having that conversation, and then getting the people who are actually in charge of doing these things, which I notice a lot of them are bailing out of their seats for other places. They need to sit down and take some responsibility for coming up with the answers.
And I
Uh,
think that's the model we have to talk about, Mark.
yeah,
Again, thinking about it, we have these capitalists that we're demonizing them, right? So, and I'm gonna just stay on that line. We have these capitalists that they're only motivated by money, and it's like, well, I'm not going to switch to something that's going to help because I need the money. And so they may need to be at the table and get a bite of the apple in order to incentivize them to switch over,
and
unless
that's
we're going to do the radical thing and just say, you know what, housing, healthcare, food, these are all basic rights, and we're just going to go and do that. I don't know the way to get to the Star Trek economy that way. So I think profiteers are going to have to continue to profit on whatever the solution is, but
it's
we can
it's why I say
incentivize.
it's why I keep saying transitional strategies.
Mhm, mhm.
We have a goal where we want to get to, but it's not something you can flip a light switch on. This is why one of our mutual friends has got pissed off at me and cut me off and doesn't talk to me anymore because I had the audacity to say, um, it takes time. You can't just flip a switch. You have to plan for it. You have to transition to it. You have to take into account that people are going you're going to have to remove the roadblocks by working with people as opposed to cutting them out.
Yeah, and we have to work with the sense of urgency. Meeting once a month or once a quarter none of that is gonna work. Our U.S. basic standard of living is starving and homeless in the street. Yeah, absolutely. And we are the richest nation in the history of mankind. I say that all the time. There is no need for anyone to be unhoused and hungry and to be unhealthy.
Yeah, and there's no needs. There's
Or
no need.
not having access to healthcare, right? I mean,
Yeah,
there are things that we can't.
yeah, and understand, Justin and Marwan. There are things I'm not saying here that I've been triggered all the way through this, and I have opinions about. But I won't get what we won't get where we need to go if I open my mouth and say things because it'll shut a whole bunch of people down. I don't. I think that it is a disgrace, and we need to get there. And this is since we're now at 2 o'clock, so I'm mindful. I do need to announce that this Saturday will be the last workshop for 2 weeks. It will be the last workshop at the library for several months because they're in the process of redoing their HVAC system. We will be continuing in early August. Look at the Kitsap Resiliency Project page on Facebook for news. We will be continuing in August at G2 for the time being. And we will, and Justin, what we do is we teach people how to have these conversations, and we work on perspective. And the first workshop, which is what we do every Saturday, is all about perspective, and no two of them are the same. But I am taking 2 weeks off at the end of the month to go back to working on my book, which I need to support the piece and to continue working on the document I'm working on now. So, right. But we will be at Cups Cafe at 10:30 every Saturday morning at Pacific and 4th. And look forward to you there. I love to have the conversations there. It's a great place to have coffee.
Absolutely. Especially when it gets colder and the fireplace is on.
Yep. And Justin, you come by on Saturday, I'll buy you a cup of coffee.
So since we're a couple minutes over, I'll take the final word today if you don't mind.
Please do.
All right. So, really what I want to say is
yes.
That get tired of what these really what we need to do. Okay? So
and I guess I am Justin is Cups Cafe on 4th and Pacific, right next to the bookstore, Palace Books. This Saturday, 10:30.
Saturday. Yep. All right. So that was the final word in truth. We'll be back at 3 p.m. We have our housing podcast with Bremerton Housing Authority.
I was going to say, with whoever they are.
So many names, man. Executive Director Jill Stanton will be joining us, and Communications Director Katie Sharp will be with us at 3 p.m. So I will see you at 3, and then we have study session tonight at 5:30 for City Council. So I will see everyone in about 56 minutes. For Mark, this is Tipping Points and Puzzle Pieces. I'm Marwan. This is The Conduit. We'll see you next time.